Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. In this episode, we'll take a look at internationalization, and namely preparing our application to handle multiple languages. In this case, we'll be using the authentication application we've been developing, as it's built with Razor Pages. We can take advantage of that to see how to do internationalization in ASP.NET. So, in the previous episode, we continued the authentication service using ASP.NET Core Identity and Razor Pages. We made some adjustments to the pages we had developed previously, added a lot of missing pages like mail confirmation, password change, reset. We also added two-factor authentication support, and then we used libman to manage client-side libraries, install Bootstrap, and then make the application a little bit less ugly, although it's not really pretty yet. In this episode, like I mentioned, we will implement multicultural support. We'll be using resource files. It's not mandatory. We can create our own providers and, for instance, put the languages files like with the strings in like a JSON or stuff like that. But the out-of-the-box support is with resource files, so we'll use the out-of-the-box support. So we'll be using resource files specific for each view, for each page model, also for inner classes of a page model. In this case, we will be using data notations like we are using for validation and stuff like that, but those strings will be localized. And we will also take a look at using shared resources, so a resource file that can be used by more than one class. And finally, we will store the preference, the cultural preference, in a cookie. So when the user navigates and gets back to the page, we'll get the same language. Before starting, like I mentioned in the last video, if the series is being useful, consider liking the video and sharing it, and of course leaving feedback so I can improve the videos. And again, this makes me aware if it's being useful, to know if I should continue or not doing this. And by having these likes and feedback, hopefully YouTube will recommend the videos to more people. So let's get coding. So, as always, documentation is key. Everything I'll talk about is in some way or another over here in the docs, although maybe not as clear. I had some problems, namely with finding out how to name properly the resource files for them to be picked up by the application. But besides that, and the debugging I had to do to find out how this worked, everything is basically here, but hopefully I can make it clearer. And then I already have the application started. We'll be localizing only the login page. No, it's not worth it to be localizing the whole application in the video. We can just use one page as an example to use the various aspects of localization. And then out of the video, I'll localize the rest of the app. But to avoid it getting too boring, we can just see things working with this page. Now, today we'll be using Visual Studio, just because it's easier to work with the resource files in Visual Studio. I can take a look, if I remember by the end of the video, to see how we can do it in Rider as well, or Visual Studio Code. But it's easier because Visual Studio is better prepared for those resource files. So I'll create a new folder called resources. It's not mandatory to have this name, it's just what's normally used. And now we'll go to the startup and start configuring localization. So services, localization, and then you can say options resources path equals resources. So by doing this, we are telling it we want to use this path to store the resources. Then we go here to the services and we do add localization. So add view localization. We can do also options. No, it's not options. Well, yes, this. We can add this, although I don't think we'll be using this. But it's on the documentation they use it like this. For what I understand is that we can really localize views without resource files. We can have like Portuguese CSHTML and English CSHTML and all of that, and the suffix would be used to differentiate the languages. I'm not going to use it, but just because the docs do this out of the box, I'll keep it. Maybe we'll take a look at it in the future. And then data annotations. So we can have in data annotations like, let me open the pages, login. So we have these data annotations like this one. So we'll change for it to be localized, we must configure it like this. So I think this is it for the services. Now over here we need app.use localization, request localization, options, so we'll use two cultures, English and Portuguese, because that's the languages I can speak, but of course this can be done in others. So the default culture will be English. I'll be using, you could do like this or like this. So specifying that it's English from the United States or English from England and stuff like that. But instead I'll just use this. So depending if an American visits the page or an English person visits the page, we'll get the same culture, because I won't be doing this separately, but I could. So options, support. We have to define the supported cultures and the supported UI cultures. Let me take a look here. Supported cultures, like functions, date, time, and supported UI. Where is it? It's here. Supported, which translates strings, are looked up. So the supported are for the functions, date, time, stuff like that, and the UI is for the resource files and stuff like that. So we must define both. No need. So let me put here what's this type? iList. I have no idea if an array implements an iList. Let's find out. So new culture info. and cultures. So we're setting up the request localization middleware, which will be responsible to fetch the culture from the request. If there is any, we can take a look here. So let's query string. Yeah. So by doing this, this middleware will fetch the localization from the request. It will try to check if there is in the query string, in the cookie, or in an header, the accept language header. If none of these providers has a culture, it will use the default one. If not, use one of these. And besides this, it has to be a supported culture. For instance, we are defining English and Portuguese. If I tell it the culture should be Spanish, it should fall back to the English US in this case, or English in our case. Okay, so this should be configured. We will be back to this configuration later, but for now this should work. So this middleware to fetch the culture and be prepared for rendering the request afterwards, the response. And over here we configured where we added localization services and said that the resources path is that folder, and also we configured MVC to use that localization for views and data annotations. So let's start with some view localization maybe. So let me check. Let me open the view. Let me see. Okay, forgot password. Seems like a good candidate. So in the resources folder, we'll basically mimic what we have here. So resources, add folder, pages, and then we'll create new item, which is a resource file, and then login.english.resource, and another one, resource login.portuguese resource. And then over here, well, apparently the recommendation is to do something like use this default immediately instead of having like an English for the default and then only having the translations for the strings. But I don't really like this approach, because if, for instance, we just change this for something else, then there won't be a match between the translations. So I prefer to do the old way, which is to replace this with like a password, like a key, and then we go here in the forgot password, here forgot password, so this makes it required to have more resource files, but I'm not a fan. It's easier to mess up, so I prefer to do it this way. Okay, so this is not the way. We need to inject the localizer. So let me see the docs. So I'm already here. So we need to inject this. I'll go here. Then inject. And then we go here. So this could be any string, like forgot password the real sentence, and by default it would stay that way. But like I said, I prefer to use the key because we won't change the key by accident. We know that by changing this we must change the resource files. So we have the resource files, we have this should work immediately, but I'm not sure. Okay, it didn't. What's the problem? I already had this problem, but I don't remember correctly what was the problem. I'm not sure if this needs to like generate something from the resource files or something like that. Let's see. So let's restart just to be on the safe side, although I don't think this will make a difference. Nope. Let's see. Let's go to the bin folder. There's English resources and Portuguese resources. Replace this one. Let's put a breakpoint here and let's check out what's going on. Forgot your password. Now it worked. So if I put here culture, this is a way, like I mentioned, the providers, query string, header, cookies, we can do this to force another language. And now it's working. I entered debug mode and it's working. What changed? I have no idea what changed. Probably Visual Studio, when we enter debug mode, does something, but I don't know what. So this is really weird. Okay, this is a mystery for me, why this worked in this way. But now for some reason it seems to be working. So if we do now it's working. I have no idea. I'm sorry, I can't really explain this part because it seems like magic. We wouldn't notice it if it wasn't for using the watch. If we were just debugging as normal, we wouldn't even get this bug. This is really weird. But oh well, let's continue. No need for wasting time. If I figure it out in the future, I'll make a video just to explain that part. Unfortunately, right now I have no idea why this doesn't work immediately. So let's continue. So what we saw with this was using view localizer. So we use localizer, put here the string we want to translate. In this case I'm using keys, but I could use the string directly. And then it will find magically this given the name. So this is for the view. We can take a look now for if we want to translate something here in the model for some reason. So for the model, as this class is named login model, we must go here and create a new item, resource again, and it will be like the other, but it will be called login model because it's its name. And Portuguese, and let me check in the over here what can we do with this. So the login model, no, this is a good one. Let's go put it in Portuguese. Now okay, so we have this one. Now we want to grab this one. We will inject over here an iString localizer of login model. Call it localizer. Just import. So the localizer, and now we can go here and replace this with localizer okay, and this should work, unless it doesn't because of the same problem we saw just now. So login, email someone at test.com, login, invalid login attempt. Now let's force this to Portuguese. Login and tentativa de login invalid. So this worked immediately, but the other one didn't. Don't ask, I have no idea. No idea whatsoever. Okay, but better. This is what we expected to work in the other case. So far we saw localizer, the iView localizer, and the localizer, in this case a string localizer, that is specific to the login model. Now let's see if we want to localize, for instance, this input model. In this case, this is a good candidate, remember me. So this one was hard for me to understand how we could localize this, but after a lot of debugging, finally figured it out. So what we need is in the resources, we will create another resource file that will be called login model plus input model. And this is really not very easy to understand. all of this, the naming conventions for the resource files to match the views, it's, for me, I'm not really a fan so far. It's really confusing, and this one was the worst. I even when trying to find out how to do this, came across a question on Stack Overflow exactly about this, and it's 7 months old and nobody had answered it. So when I finally figured it out how to do this, I answered the question. And create another one for Portuguese. Okay. So now can close this one, and now we replace this remember me with remember me. Again, the recommended way is the other way, but I'm not a fan. So I'm going here, remember. Okay, so this should work immediately again, and we should have here this translated. Let's try again, and we have in Portuguese lembrar-me. If I remove it, remember me. Now it's working how it's supposed to. I have no idea. I'm annoyed by that bug. But okay, so this seems simple, but I spent hours trying to figure out how to name this thing. The way I may be interesting for how I debugged to find out how to do this. Over here in the annotations localization, we can pass a func and over here there's an option for us to change the localization provider, localizer provider. And this gets a type, which is the type for which we want the localizer provider, and the factory. So we can use this to override, but what I did was just to find out the names of the types to try to figure out how to name this. So I just did something like in the factory there's a logger, just old school stuff, console, write line. Yeah, I know this is awful, but it's the way it was easier for me to do it. So hardcore old school debugging skills. And over here I just type the full name, and okay, so we can just return factory dot create, passing the type. Now if we go here, refresh, and now we have this, and you see this appears here. That's basically how I found out I should use the plus sign, because I had no idea. I was using the dot like for the others, and I even created a folder called login model, and then inside of it created the input model resource file. Didn't work, but then when I figured out I could debug it like this, full name and then the plus sign, well, it made a click and I was able to create that part. So maybe for debugging purposes this sometimes is interesting. Okay, so what we have so far according to the planning, let's just take a look. Resource files, so view specific resources for the first one we saw, page model specific, page model inner classes, in this case with data annotation, but if we add code inside of there, we could probably use the same way. Now let's take a look at shared resources. And this is another one that feels a lot like a hack, and I'm not a fan, but let's take a look at it. So, not here, over here, let's create another resource. And in this case, this is really weird, but we can see it's in the documentation. It's really weird, but it's here. So, shared resource. Where is it? Yeah. We must create like a dummy class to group the shared resources. Let me show you. So over here we'll create a new class called shared resource. Okay, it's done. Almost. I'll show you. And now we must add a resource file. And it will be called shared resource.m. And it is grouped inside this class. Now we add another one. I add new item resource, so shared resource Portuguese. Oops. Okay, and it's grouped in there. This is really hacky, but okay. Now over here, I have no idea where I can use it, so maybe I'll just log it. We can see it working without. Yeah, I'll just over here. Let me break this stuff up. It's not that big in a normal font, but because I'm using this large font. So we want a iString localizer of shared resource. Shared whoops. Okay, I want to type with the underscore. Okay, and now we can like on get do shared localizer dot, no need for the dot, logger log debug, and let's add this here. Like you see, this is so hacky, Visual Studio doesn't even like it. Yes, simple shared string, so I'll call it, oh, it's the English one. And over here, yes. Okay, and now we are expecting to see this on debug. I'll tell you right now, it won't, but almost. So if we go here, debug, sample shared string, so we didn't. But if we, for some reason, I have no idea why, because I didn't want to take a look at the inner code, although I could. If we go here and remove this one, this is probably the way that the locations and all that stuff works, the conventions. For me, this isn't clear. Maybe because of in the startup we said that it's on the resources, so maybe resources shouldn't be part of the namespace. I have no idea. This is really weird. This is one of the weirdest episodes where I'm telling stuff I'm not really sure why, but yeah, this is how it works. So if I remove this and now make the request, okay. Oh, of course, I removed this, so I need to go here, take this out, and now it works. What about now? Now it works. If we go back, now we see the string, a sample shared string. And if we force the culture, oops, uma string partilhada de exemplo. So it's working. I'm sorry, I can't explain better why we need to do it this way. This is just creating this class, so group those ones seems really hacky, but that's what we have. Maybe one day I'll just take a look at the source code of ASP.NET, this part, and try to figure it out why this is like this, but for now, at least we know how it's working. So the final subject we have here is, let's store the culture preference in a cookie. So we don't need to do this first one I'm doing here. And here, let me find cookie. Okay, so we need to make some changes to the code we have so far. We can close this part. And now in the startup, we did this culture directly here. But for instance, now that we want like a drop down with all the languages, we need to access these cultures. So a better way to do this is to go over here and then add like services.configure request localization options. Let me check here. Okay, so options. And we can just copy part of this. Not all, but okay. Where is it? Over here. So we need the cultures, and then yes, this an array is cooler. So we have the options, and now over here we can get rid of this. And in the options we can just get it from app.application services. Request localization options dot value. Oh, it's an I options, I think. Let me check. Yeah, by using this configure, I think we need to do an I options. And then value, if I'm not mistaken. So this should work as before, but now we have this so we can configure it, we can fetch it later. Let me clean this up a bit. So now we can grab that. So we'll create a partial view to be used on the layout. Over here, so shared layout. Let's create a partial view here. View. Select culture partial. And over here we want to inject my options. Microsoft extensions, options, my options of ASP.NET Core Builder, requests creation options. Okay. Now let's take a look at what they do here. So they configure this and then set the culture programmatically. So let me just change the name. So let me see. Okay, I'll copy this part. It's easier. So to have the includes, so this context features gets the current request folder, return URL. Return URL, yeah, we'll need this. So this is the current culture. These are all the other cultures. Instead of display name, I will use you'll see why in a bit. So we are creating a list, a select list, so we can use a select HTML element and create this list, return URL. Okay. Request. Query. And now let's take a look. I'll copy part of this. I'll copy part of this. It's easier than typing all of this. So clean up this. ISP controller. I will have a culture controller. Set culture action. No need for this one. And on change, yeah, seems nice. Let me put this below, so this select on change will immediately submit a form. It uses the current request, so it is selected, and uses the culture items to list. So okay, now we must render this. So this isn't needed, so we can get rid of it. This should... no, we need the controller. So before that, we can just go to the layout and use this container. And over here, wait. Set culture partial. What's the problem? This is strange. Header. So you're telling me this won't work because of reasons. Cannot convert from void to object. Okay. What does that mean? Let me see the methods. So this is a task. No, this should be the one I should be using. So does it show up? Was not found. Was not found. Oh, select. Select. How about now? Okay, and it's here. English, Portuguese. We just take right here div. Another div. Call SM3 should be enough. I wanted to go to the right. Don't remember the name. How is that called? Offset. Offset. Same 9. No, stop. Yay. This looks awful, but okay. whatever. I'll take care of it later, not the point of this. So we have this. Now we need to create a controller to handle it. Just to make it so, like I think I mentioned, we can mix and match MVC and pages and all of that. So let's create here a controller, a folder for controllers, and we'll create, really? Go figure. I'm using Visual Studio Preview, so maybe some bugs are from that. Okay, let's see if the docs tell us how to store it. Yeah. Copying and pasting. Okay, so select culture. Let's include this part. So this is using, so we get a return URL to make the redirect and the culture we want to set. Then we append to the cookies, the response cookies, using this cookie provider, cookie request culture provider. So it will use the default cookie name and create a cookie value for this culture. So if there weren't those helpers, we had to do it by hand, but it exists. We can take advantage of it. And the provider over on startup, this one, will be able to read this. So let's try it. So if we do this, okay, this is my fault, of course, as always. Request, I think this one would do the trick. English, Portuguese. Let's just use the query strings to make sure stuff equals stuff. Now let's change the language and it remains correct. Portuguese. So return URL, login, stuff. I just wanted to make sure we had the query string correct. Okay, so we have this. Now we can just do add one final touch that is, although not needed. We can go to the pages and over here, pages, add a new folder, shared, and then create add a new item resource dot English Portuguese, and then we can do English, or better yet, English, and over here English. Of course this would be prettier with flags, but later. These, and now we go here, and instead of this we can do localizer, get string this. So if we go here now, it's the same, because I don't know why. So, couple of possible reasons. I did this wrong, or it's the same issue we've seen in the beginning. So let's try to stop this, just to be sure, and enter this in debug. Now if we go here, okay, so it apparently is not because of that issue, it's something else. I don't know what. Let me think. It seems weird. Let's do the same we did before. Debugging. Let's put the breakpoint here. It's that weird issue again. Oh, now I was really stupid. It should be inside this. No, it was just a problem, the old problem between the computer and the chair. Now, okay, so Portuguese, English, finally. Okay, seems about right. So, to wrap up, I think we covered all that was supposed to. So, resource files with specific views, specific page models, inner classes in those page models, shared resources, and storing the culture in the cookie. So it's about it. You've seen that, yeah, maybe it's my fault of not understanding everything, but it's really weird, the conventions to map for the views. I think it's a bit weird, could be a bit better, but okay. Of course, we could roll our own, so it's an option to use this. And like I said, we used resource files, but we could use other providers. I think someone made like a JSON one, but since it wasn't official, for now I prefer to go with the resource files. So that's it. Maybe just take a look why I used Visual Studio. So I have Rider opened over here. So we have here the resource files. The problem is we don't get that view like in Visual Studio. We just see the XML, and we can work with that. We can just go here, edit here, or like create a new entry, data, name something, preserve space. Okay, probably be better if we do this. And then over here we can create a value and something. So it would work. Maybe we'll use it in the future, but for now, for these samples, I think it was easier just to use Visual Studio and use this view, because the naming convention and all of that are already pretty confusing in some cases, so no need for more confusion. And that's about it. If you have any idea why that thing only solved itself when I enter debug, please let me know. I'm not really sure. So and okay, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you in the next one. See yous.